Welcome to episode 249 of Silver Lining for Learning. I am one of your co-hosts, Punya Mishra, joined by Chris Didi from Harvard University. Kurt Bonk is missing. Yang Zhao is traveling. Lydia Kao is, I think, am I right, Chris, that she's doing Canadian Thanksgiving this
It's
weekend?
Canadian Thanksgiving today.
Canadian Thanksgiving. And so it's going to be Chris and I leading the way. And today we are heading to New York to explore something truly special. What happens when STEM education meets contemplation, creativity, and self inquiry? Our guests are my friend Raaghav Pandya, and I'm very proud to say my friend because he emailed me out of the blue. I think it was like a year ago, and we have been meeting and talking about films and science. And I have no idea what. I actually started watching both Shanghai and Z last night, side by
I
side.
We
Anyway,
talked
so
about it like
that's
an hour prior, but yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's been a pleasure to get to know Raghav and wanted to get him on the show. And I said, that we would love to get more than one. We appreciate having more than one voice. And he strongly recommended Talya Stein, who is senior program manager with NYC First STEM Centers. So I think our conversation today is going to be focusing on what does it mean to learn through making. Talia, my understanding is that you've spent a decade creating spaces where students discover their own capabilities by building robots and tackling real challenges. And Raghav, you do this interesting thing of bringing contemplative philosophies and traditions, Eastern traditions, into the mix in your work around science, aesthetics, and self-inquiry, right? So this is, I think, more than teaching kids to code or build. It is about developing the whole human. Things, again, we are very committed to and passionate about here on Silver Lining. So without further ado, because we would love to hear from you, I'm going to pass the baton to you. So briefly, tell us a little bit about yourself. Raghav, you have a background in physics and philosophy, with an interest in Eastern traditions and cinema. I mean, how does all that? And you also wear multiple hats. From what I understand, you have like 7 jobs, and I don't know how you manage that. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'm sure we will learn more, and then we'll pass the baton to Talia.
Sure. I mean, that's very kind of you. I don't think I wear that many hats, but I learn from the best, from people like you who can kind of, do balancing performances in different spheres. But to give you a short introduction, I'm a professor at the New York City College of Technology in their teacher education uh, overall. So we have STEM educators, technology, we have all different kinds of vocation. And it's in the City University of New York, the college. So being it's like predominantly a STEM college, we are the only education or the second education department. So uh, it's been really awesome to kind of cultivate spaces and courses that are not only centered around science, but allow for me to infuse my passion for Eastern traditions, contemplative philosophy within learning. Um, and there I direct the Innovate Lab, which is almost like an education lab where we get to experiment with the intersections of creativity, science learning, and contemplative philosophies and try to, extrapolate that to our teaching students who then bring those practices to their classrooms. And the last hat, I'm a fellow at Teachers College Columbia University. So at the Gordon Institute for Advanced Research, we kind of take on projects that are both within New York City and outside across borders, whether it's like the Barbados Ministry of Education or upstate in New York, consulting with districts and trying to revolutionize the way they, break through hundreds of year old traditional pedagogy and empower their students. So uh, those are the titles, but beyond those, what actually pushes me is what you'd mentioned at the latter end of your introduction, that I come from a physics and philosophy background in undergrad, and then what really was like the compass of my work was being brought up in an Eastern tradition, particularly practicing the philosophy of yoga, exposing myself to the Buddhist traditions, Vedanta, things of that sort, and noticing that there is a corollary between their methodology of inquiry and how we inquire within science. And so that kind of became the compass of, impacting classrooms.
I love that. When Raghav and I first met, I come from, I mean, I'm a born Hindu in the sense I'm what like Dawkins would call a cultural Hindu, right? a completely non-practicing, completely atheist, to have somebody with have this wonderful overlap in terms of care and concern for learning and science and aesthetics and sort of the artistic aspect of science, and have this different perspective on it. It makes me think, and I love that. So thank you, Raga, for adding that to my sort of intellectual turmoil. So Talia, on to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about me. So I think my first thought is that I'm a mother of three boys. That's where, and everything I try at home, I bring to the classroom. So if it's working, if the experiments or anything they like to do at home, I teach it. And I studied art and design. So I come from my first thing, I'd sculpt at the age of 3. And then that took me to Bezalel in Israel. I grew up in Israel. And then I had a teacher who said, you need to go to ITP at NYU. You need to make your stuff move, because it was graphic design. And so then I came to New York, and that was 14 years ago now. And then I studied interactive design, and I discovered the makerspace. And I lived inside that makerspace. I wouldn't leave. And then I started helping open makerspaces. And I'm now at NYC First. I've been there for 8 years. I helped start the first one 8 years ago. First is, and I'll just share a little about NYC First. First runs robotics competitions worldwide, all around the world, everywhere. There's competitions. And then NYC First is a New York branch. Now, unique to NYC First is that we did the STEM Center initiative. And so this branch is beyond the robotics. And it's really about giving access to every kid in New York to STEM education. That's really what it's about. And we started our first one 8 years ago on the Cornell Tech campus. And it was open to everyone, and we focused on high school kids. And now last year, I opened one in Brooklyn, which is specific for District 13. So it's not that specific one isn't open to everyone. It's like an extension of their classroom. So it's all about complementing the learning. And I'm working with a wonderful team, and we're just creating new content all the time and working with the teachers, and all about what they're doing in their classroom, and how, if they're, I don't know, the boy who harnessed the winds, they're reading it and learning it and learning that story. So they come to us, and now they'll make a circuit, they'll try tradition, like they'll make stuff. And then think about the community too. It's all about community, very strong about community. And so I'm all about making. That's what I do.
All right. So there is this overlap, I think, Talia, you and I have with this whole design thing, because my background is from engineering to design and then to education. And the other thing is this thing that you said about experimenting, like, with your kids, that has a grand tradition in psychology going back to Piaget. And, my kids are older now, but I'll send you some links to things that we've done together, which are like extremely silly and fun, but then they would feed back into things that I would do in my classroom in master's and PhD level courses. What I was playing with my kids when they were 6, 7 years old would feed into things that we would do in the classroom. So I completely resonate and understand that. I'm going to kick us off with one question, then Chris, maybe pass the baton to you. Both of you talked about sort of the journey that brought you here. I would love to hear about, was there like a moment or something where you felt that STEM education was missing something that you could bring to that mix? It might be a moment, it might be a realization over time that said that, oh, there is something that my way of looking or thinking, or something that inspires me, can contribute to this in ways that are not happening right now. And Talia, maybe I'll start with you and flip back to Raghav for this one.
Absolutely. I think that I was, and you were saying this before, that you were kind of a troublemaker, and so I wouldn't. Growing up as a kid, I would leave the classroom all the time because I would laugh all the time and it would cause trouble in the class, and they'd prefer I'd be out of the class. And it was honestly because I was bored. I wasn't into what was being taught. And I think that if you catch a kid's passion, if you can understand what they're passionate about, if you tap into that, then the kid is hooked. And it's about that. And so I think that's always the entry to what I'm looking about. When I was teaching now 7 years high school kids, and it was never about the robot. The robot was a framing. It's a framing it's a vessel to teaching them. But it's about what do you care about? Is it design? Is it community? Is it about fundraising? Is it what is it that you're passionate about? And that's how we get the kids. And so I think it's passion and fun. And that's what I try to bring into the classroom. And
Sure.
no grades, Chris.
Right. Yeah. And
Not about grades.
I remember this moment. I must have been in second or third grade, and the teacher, I could hear my mom had come to talk to my teacher. This is back in India, and I could hear, and I could see the lip movement of I remember that moment crystal clear. And she was saying something about this guy being doggedive. And from the lip movement, and then my mom was so mad at me, like, you don't pay attention in school, you are talking all the time. And it's exactly the same thing, which I was bored, you know.
Yeah.
So I hear that. Raghav, on to
Because
you.
we'd lecture them, traditional
Yes.
classrooms lecture kids,
Yeah.
That's true.
rather than having a conversation with them and engaging them and having them lead the classroom. The
Yeah.
kids should be
Thank you.
leading.
Thank you. Thank you for that memory. I just remember that so clearly from, I must have been 7 or 8, you know. So, Raghav, anything that stands out?
Yeah, so I think for me, one is a like comprehensive reflection on how I was taught science and engineering, and one is like a concurrent parallel. So like as much as I was engaging in physics and science and teaching it, at the same time, my personal contemplative practice or engagement with philosophy was going on almost extracurricularly. And so I felt like a dissonance between the two, because I felt like if you read a Tagore, or you read even like a Maxine Greene, you find such optimism and uh, you know beauty that they find in the classroom or in teaching. And then at the same time, you go to a college classroom that teaches physics about the beautiful universe, and you're like, why is this guy so boring? Like, what the content is you can't have more incredible content, and yet you are so lame. Like, how can that dissonance exist? And so that that experience really pushed me to understand that the flaw isn't in the content, the flaw is in the pedagogical approach or the intention with what someone teaches. And that allowed me to find the intersection between like the natural learning and joy that may exist in certain traditions of the world, whereas when I go to a college campus or with a professor, I'm like, no, duh, students don't care about what you have to say. Like, why would they listen to you? And so that dissonance was that reflection of that dissonance later on in life as I adulted was the push.
Nice.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris, it's on to you.
So I want to present some of my own thinking about making and get your critique of it. So this is not to say, here's how you should think about making. This is just sort of my own wrestling with it. And I'll begin with the fact that my parents were really into paint by number. I don't know if you remember.
I love that. Yes, I love
paint by number. They
also
loved paint
sticker
by
books of
number.
paint by number,
They
but
did
yes.
paintings. They hung them on the walls. They were very proud. And I'm proud of them. I like paint by number. This is not critical about paint by number. But did they learn anything about painting? No. They learned about crafting, but not about painting. And I brought that lens to constructionism, which is one of the things Seymour Papert argued, and then the MIT Media Lab has picked this up and run with it. The best way to learn something is constructionism. And as someone who's sympathetic to making, I agree with parts of that claim. But there is a branch of constructionism that I think Papert was actually part of that says pure unguided constructionism is what people should be doing. And you give kids a bunch of stuff and you just turn them loose, but you don't spoil their creativity by giving them any advice about what might be happening.
Mm.
And I think that that people benefit from reflection and they benefit from advice, especially if you're attempting to teach not just how, but you're trying to teach why. If you're trying to get into the underlying causality that is really the heart of STEM, you've got to be reflecting. You can't just be constructing. And when you're reflecting, it helps to get reflections that others have done before to give you some bricks to make your reflection. So you're making your object, but then you need to make your reflection. So I end up with these sort of two axes in my mind. At one end, there's an axis between crafting, just following a recipe like paint by number, and pure open-ended design, like I think Pandya probably does in his classes. Imagine something you want to build and go for it. And there's another matrix between just kind of production, emphasizing production, getting all caught up in flow, seeing how big a thing and how fast a thing you can build, versus reflection, which is maybe moving slower, maybe not building something as big, but understanding better, the why parts of it and how it might transfer and relate to things in life. And I think that maybe the right approach is somewhere not at the extremes, but in the middle of that. But I would not present myself as an expert on making. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on first, whether the framework is even worth bothering with, and then how you might place your own thinking and your own work on
it. That's a really interesting combination of axes. And I think I agree with you for the most part in that I'm going to backtrack a little. Actually, I feel that in certain making and creativity exercises, it does behoove the classroom and enable the students when there's almost like a free for all playing and making. But I think if you are attempting to ground the students and yourself in some sort of intention, then the reflection is more so necessary. And so I think there are like two ways to go about it. It depends on what the class is. It depends on who the students are. It depends on what the department, like what's the intention of it. Like if you're in kindergarten, it's probably, if you're teaching elementary school, it's probably hard to be like, okay, let's ground ourselves in the intention of why we're making what we're making. But at the same time, I've done exercises with faculty where there's a free-for-all make and play and design without any sort of structure. And the reason I've done that, I feel like the more I'm talking, the more I'm leaning the other way in my discussion, but that's okay. We find the sentences as we go. So I've done exercises with faculty or educators where we'll go out into the nearby nature or trail, do a guided breathing or meditation practice, and then we'll come back to a makerspace or a lab that has all the materials and gizmos and gadgets. And from the contemplation and inquiry exercises that we did alone in silence, allow that to guide whatever you're making is going to be. There's no real rules. And I do both. I'll do the thing where like, okay, let's all design a bag. Let's all design something that reminds you of the most fulfilling experiences of your childhood. Some sort of structure, but sometimes I won't. And the reason I do that is because more often than not, students and faculty are so used to thinking within boundaries and territories and departments that it limits their imagination. Particularly teachers, right? Like if you go to a technology or engineering teacher and say, I want you to teach students how to 3D print, what they'll do is pre-decide what object, like this is, they'll pre-decide the object that everyone's going to 3D print. And that automatically limits the student's exposure to, maybe I can just think of my own thing. I don't need someone to do that. So I do both exercise and I value both. But for the sake of not allowing an educator or faculty member to get into the habit of thinking within their own boundaries and programming, I allow them to just make or create without any rules.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. I value both approaches very much. I think I love color by stickers, which is very similar to fill up the colors. And because when I see the kids do it, they have a strong sense of accomplishment when they finish following the step-by-step guide of just, it's very clear what you need to do, and you have a sense of accomplishment. And the same goes to Legos, right? When they get a set and you've got a step-by-step instruction, and they finish building that thing and they've made it. And a lot goes to the value of sense of accomplishment. Also, giving no guidance, which follows after you know how to do the thing, whatever that is that you're learning, then it's go wild, go get creative, do whatever you want with. Now you have some basic knowledge to build upon. When in the, I was thinking as you were talking about, when we started the STEM centers, we were working with high schoolers with classes, and when the season of the competition ended, we would do a project, build a project, right? You have a semester to do whatever it is you want. It should be community-based, something that your community needs or wants, and build something. And in the beginning, we gave very, very little guidance. And the kids just got lost in, like, it was just too broad. And then we would give just a sentence, just a header. It's under the umbrella of X topic. And then what we did the following year was we partnered with nonprofits, and we would give like 3 to 5 options of projects that are very specific, what it is that is the need, is a want, is a project. And we'd always give a open project where do whatever you want. You can either fulfill on this goal, or if there's something you're passionate about, go for it, as long as it's in the frameworks. And there were goals, like it needs to follow the design thinking process, you need to document your process, and you need to present it in the end, right? And you need to test, etc. And every year there would be very few students who would do the completely open-ended one. It was just too broad. And although I come from, like, I'm sure I would always choose the free-ended one, I think that, like Ken Robinson always says, in education, many a times you get educated out of your creativity. So by the time they're in high school, like, I think the little ones would probably all do the creative one, right? In kindergarten. But you need to get educated back into creativity after a while. So both have value.
So, Chris, can I just jump into this?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean,
please.
I'm just really seeing this as a conversation. So I and I teach classes and then university. So there are, like, I have to have a syllabus, and I have to have, like,
Yes.
curricular goals and stuff. So the tension there becomes between this sort of open-endedness, which I really want to go for, but also certain goals that actually want students to get from it. So my class that I'm teaching right now is called Education by Design. So it's about bringing a design perspective to education. And so I do want, I mean, there are certain things I want them to learn from it. I want them to read Donald Shawn. I want them to read Nigel Cross and think about like how designers actually work. I want them to understand that there is a body of thinking, going all the way back to Simon and so on about how we approach design. At the same time, I want them to be doing these sort of open-ended passion projects. And what I have learned is that the more sort of structure I give to the day-to-day routine, the more creative people become in that. So when I first started teaching, everything was open. Oh, you can do whatever you want. We can choose whatever we read. And people would have the deer in the headlights look and not know which way to go. And so now my classes are very nicely. I mean, when you come in, first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about examples of good and bad design that you have found in the world. Then the next thing we're going to do. So there is this semblance of structure, which I think guides, gives them like coherence. Yeah. Within that, it is pretty chaotic. But it's a very interesting design challenge, I think, and I would love to hear both of your thoughts on that, about balancing that. Like Talya, you talked about that one sentence. Maybe that's enough to like focus things a little bit, and then you can actually go wherever you want. And I'm just curious about that because this is a struggle that I've had, and every semester I teach, or every year I teach, is I'm learning something new about how to structure that thing.
Yeah. Responding to what you said, Punya, that I think that's exactly right. Like there is this, it's almost like a sweet spot. There's an anxiety of having no structure, and there is a conditioning of people for having too much structure.
Exactly.
And I think that's where the skill of the educator lies. A masterful teacher or educator is one who understands exactly where the fence needs to be built, but doesn't tell the water or the stream where to go. Right. So like it knows, okay, I need to build the fence of the canal here, but the water can go where it wants. And that's the masterful teacher. So I think it's almost like a skill that becomes so intuitive for an educator. And Punya, obviously you've done it for so many years in your classroom that you've developed that. But I had a similar experience. So for my college students, I taught a course last semester. And to give you context, this is not my graduate students. This is undergraduate BS in education students who will mostly become engineering and technology educators. So there's a class I teach called Principles of Engineering. But the way that class is traditionally taught is you go through the history of engineering, the various different fields of engineering, the contributors, the mathematicians, the physicists, that sort of thing. And I was like, and then you do little exercises for each, category of engineering. And I was like, this is so archaic. Like they already know this. They can Google this. This is informative. It's not experiential. And so I felt it was my responsibility to infuse the class with a level of understanding the creativity, design, and, service orientedness that engineering could have, because it didn't exist in that prior. And so for me, how I try to apply what you're talking about is providing a structure in terms of the literature and ideas that are talked about, but giving a project that is pretty specific, not specific enough. So I'll give you an example. So we did an app development project where the students were asked to take a walk in their communities, wherever they live, a 10-minute walk, and observe a common hurdle that people in their community face. And this is New York City. So their community is like a few blocks, because the community will change within a few blocks. So whether it's Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, whatever borough you're from, you take a stroll for about 10 minutes and you just observe a common hurdle that people face. And if it were a quicker, more efficient, more communicative, then it would solve, it would save them a lot of time and headache. And the idea here was to recognize that engineering is fundamentally problem solving that can contribute to the well-being of people in your community. So one student came up with the idea, and you had to develop a UI for an app. But you're not developing the entire app. You're just developing like the front page and some, design cues for the other pages of your app. So one student came up with the idea of delivery for halal carts in New York City. Because in Queens, there's lines during lunch, and you can sometimes you just can't get it. Another student came up with the idea of an app that monitors the potholes in Brooklyn, because there's just so many near the bridge. Things like this that they would have not noticed otherwise, and the only structure was the literature and app development, and that's it. And then they're allowed to run free. So that's kind of like an application of what you're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think the structure that I give in all ages, if it's a 3-hour class and if it's a full semester a year, it's always a design thinking process. That I always take them through that. So whatever it is, observe a problem or a need or a challenge, and then, okay, let's research it. Let's sketch a solution. Let's talk about it, observing, all the time observing and having communication and conversation around it. Then prototype it. Again, every step, observing, showing, getting feedback. And then taking it through the next step, and then testing it out, and going through that process and presenting a lot of, always talking about the process. And I think even when it's very open-ended, just a sentence, just a header, if you give that framework and break it into milestones, adding a timeline helps a lot. If you give it a good deadline, then I think people come up with very creative solutions.
Chris, please.
So let me talk about another kind of aspect of making that I've been thinking about. For decades, I and my colleagues have been building immersive, authentic simulations. And from 2009 to 2019, we built 4 virtual ecosystems. So it's a little like an internet game. You go through the monitor, you have an avatar in the virtual world, and you put on the shoes of an ecosystem scientist. So you're going through an ecosystem. It's changing over time. Something weird is happening from your perspective. And you learn the skills of an ecosystem scientist, inquiry, knowledge about ecosystems, and so on, to figure things out. And the last of the 4 curricula we built was really the most elaborate, and it was for the youngest population. It was for 3rd graders. So it's an ecosystem that changes over 15 years. First, beavers come and the stream turns into a pond, and then the pond kills trees, and woodpeckers come, and woodpeckers again change the ecosystem. And then we said, well, to help kids in the spirit of Seymour Papert, you can embody yourself as the beaver, and you can go cut down trees and build a dam, or as the woodpecker and go peck on things and find insects. And the kids loved that, especially because there was a wolf. And so if you were a little too carefree as a beaver, you get eaten.
Oh.
But then we said, then let's add computational modeling, because if you are the beaver, then you are thinking about what to do next. And so you can build in another world, another virtual world, a modeling world. You can use a appropriate programming language for 3rd graders to build computational modeling. Well, the kids loved all this and did really well with it. It's called Econod, if you ever want to look it up.
Yes.
So I was thinking a month ago about how would I build Econod now that we have Gen AI. And of course, a lot of things occurred to me about having richer conversations with people that you meet inside of the virtual ecosystem about what's going on, and being able to give voice commands, and others having the back end analyze conversational data to more deeply understand what kids were and weren't learning, and so on. But then I thought of something related to my daughter, the mechanical engineer. And I said, what if we break the 4th wall? What if we give the kids some physical artifacts that they can make things with in the classroom, and ask them to make something that would help one of these animals. So with the beaver, maybe some kind of things that are better support structures for the dam, or maybe there's a wolf detection device to try to help them be safer. And for the woodpecker, maybe there's an enhanced drilling capacity to get the insects better. But then you break the fourth wall because you take a picture of what you've built and you teleport it through into the virtual ecosystem, and you have a digital twin of what you built that the woodpecker and the beaver can actually try to use. I mean, it's weird, right? It's weird and playful, but it's also a way of getting engineering into the curriculum that's different than saying, well, I have to throw something else out so that we can have engineering as part of it.
Sure.
And I just wondered what you thought of that whole idea of breaking the fourth wall and turning something that's made into a digital twin that's used in a virtual environment. And first, let's recognize Kurt.
Hello, Kurt.
Kurt Bonk, who is here.
Hello, Kurt.
Where are you joining us from, Kurt? Oh, you're muted.
Aren't I? Hi, everyone. I'm at the Conrad Hilton Hotel on Wireless Road, which is the Embassy Road in Bangkok.
Oh,
Ah,
okay.
Wow.
The U.S. Embassy is right next door. Yeah.
So what time is it there now?
It is 20 to 12.
Okay, well,
It's not too bad.
thank you for joining. Yeah.
You're
So,
dedicated.
yes, Talya, Raghav, thoughts on Chris's idea?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. First of all, the original iteration, and then how you've thought about breaking the fourth wall to make a digital twin so that people can think about maybe contributing to solve the problem of a beaver and see it from a first person perspective, right? Like we might try to solve the problem of an ecosystem or something that's near our community, not necessarily experiencing that issue of a local, like squirrels or deer or whatever the case may be. But in this structure, you're having a first person experience of the problem and solving it. I think it's quite brilliant. In fact, it's related to what, and I think my brain kind of naturally does this, brings it back to what is your compass and what kind of guides your pedagogical perspective. But this is very similar to what I've found to be the insight of contemplative traditions and their approach to teaching. I mean, obviously, there's some of these philosophies are ancient and they did not have the advent of augmented reality to really come up with any of this. But the idea that when you inquire enough about yourself, you'll find a relation to the natural world and the universe. And when you see some level of connection or interdependence, your contribution to the world and universe will not be one of third person, will be of first person. That you'll feel a natural collective sentiment when you try to solve an issue of the local oaks, an ecosystem of oak trees or beavers, and that is something that's inherently connected to the traditions of definitely the Eastern pedagogical traditions, whether it's like yoga or Vedanta, but also West African, Aborigines, indigenous here as well. I'm not speaking to their scientific contributions, but their approach to teaching in the sense that if we live and teach within nature, we'll find in this inquiry of observing what it is and how it functions, a natural connection to it. And so although it's not a technological augmented reality, you're kind of transported and thinking about the tree or the beaver or the wolf as just part of you or someone who's part of the same ecosystem that you live in. And that level of empathy is not only relevant today, particularly considering the climate crisis and how the students who are currently in school will have a world that's vastly different than the one we all grew up in. So I find that approach to be extremely relevant culturally.
I agree. I just agree. There's no better to make something from something that you've experienced than you have a true opinion and experience over what it is you're making. So I think taking it through the virtual, then taking it into the physical, and also the physical in the sense of igniting another sense of senses, right? Like you're not just observing, you're making, like it takes it to the next level. So
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah,
brilliant.
cool.
Yeah.
So
I was gonna.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Raaghav.
No, I was just gonna add to Talia made me think about something that we worked together on, if that's okay, Punya, before your next question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I've done a couple workshops with Talia and her educators that are in her makerspace, and then she's invited some students and been very gracious to have me in there.
Lucky to have you there.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet. But I kind of attempt to do the work that Chris is talking about and has been working on for decades. So we have a bunch of engineering students and teachers, and traditionally, if you ask people what is their notion of STEM, it's going to be what they find that is the most technologically relevant. They'll say stuff like AI, they'll say stuff like cell phones, they'll say stuff like drones, things that are culturally emergent, and have been kind of shoved down their throat through media and TV. They'll be like, that's engineering, that's technology, that's STEM. And what often gets lost in that is noticing the inherent design and problem solving that exists in nature, that it's already there. Like you don't have to go elsewhere to see it. And so with Talya and her teachers via the Roots movement, it's a nonprofit that I've been fortunate enough to co-found, but I got to give the credit to my brother, Keshav, who really started doing these kind of workshops with schools. The idea is that you take students and teachers into a natural environment or something that's close enough in their school proximity, and through guided exercises, whether it's meditation or breathing or discussion, like a Socratic discussion, the attempt is to recognize your inherent creativity and the inherent creativity in nature, and not only see science and engineering as this third person experience with machines and robots, and then bring that into the classroom. So what Talya said and what Chris said made me immediately think of those exercises that we did together.
So this is actually a perfect segue to where I would like to go, and I'll give a little bit of introduction. So for me, learning, I mean, this is growing up in India, learning science was a deeply aesthetic experience, a sense of sort of uh, uh, like it's just awe, a sense of awe, a sense of surprise, a sense of understanding, of knowing something about how the world works. And one of my so I'm an academic, so I write a lot. That's part of my job, right? So one of the disappointments of my life is that I have this one paper on like the aesthetic experience in learning STEM, which nobody has ever read or cited or whatever. I feel very sad about it. It's my little baby who never got the love that it deserved, I think. And what I hear from both of you is there is this sort of element of that in how you think about the work. And maybe Raghav, I hear it a little bit more from you, and Talia, you haven't had a chance to talk to that aspect a little bit. And I'm wondering whether those elements play a role, whether, it is in terms of if you're building something that there is an aesthetic element to the build that you're making, the thing that you're making. Again, like Dewey talks about this 4 impulses for learning, and it talks about inquiry and communication and construction, and the fourth one he says is expression, that when we create something, we always put something of ourselves in that is an aesthetic impulse in and of itself. And also conversely, that when we learn something about the world, that there is an aesthetic element to that as well. A mathematical proof, mathematicians will say, is elegant, it's beautiful, and we don't often talk about things like that in our STEM classrooms. We don't often talk we don't know how to use that language without feeling like weird about it. And I wonder, how is that something that you guys think about? If it does, how does it play out in the work that you do? And yeah, that's, I'm just supremely curious about it.
So in the world of robots, when they're building a robot, with them it's always design follow function. First, get it to work well, and then make it aesthetic, and it naturally, as you said, it's always part of them naturally flow into that. once it's working with it, and I work with high schools, we tell them always to pimp up the robot and to add to it some bling and to make it their aesthetic design fingerprint on it. So a big part of the robotics is just making a logo, making a swag, choosing a color palette, choosing an aesthetic design to it all. And some of these robots look like no other, like they pimp it out. And so we do absolutely talk about aesthetics. It sometimes goes into the robot itself. It sometimes goes into what they're wearing, their flags, everything, the pins, stickers, everything they're making, and the strong branding to it all. So it's their team, but it absolutely comes through everything they're making.
So, Talya, can I ask a
Yeah.
sort of a question into that? Because so that's one aspect of aesthetics, which is that you have made this object and now you're trying to make it sort of express certain feelings or ideas that you have. I'm thinking something maybe slightly deeper than that, which is that even in the construction of the robot, there's a book called Beautiful Code that, that one can
Yes.
write code which is better than other code from the point of view of being more efficient, more elegant, more, solving a problem smartly. I'm wondering whether there are conversations about that when you're building your robot, like, oh, this team did this ingenious way of solving this problem. So that's an engineering aesthetic, which is different from in
Yeah.
some way that, oh, now I've built this and I'm going to add a layer to it. I'm just curious whether those
Yes.
conversations happen.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Well, I think, and this also goes to creativity, but also it's like, do you rush to make your own design, or do you stop a second and research and look at what others have done before you? Because you're never the first to solve this problem. Like as a geniuses have tried to solve it prior. And so we definitely, everything we do, we start with research and seeing how others have done it and learning from that. And then go off and make your own design. Then go off and give it your own spin. But absolutely, first stop and learn and look at what others have made. And it's a big part of the learning and the teaching. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Raghav?
Yeah, I was gonna say having the privilege of teaching college students pedagogy along with, STEM, there's a freedom you get in terms of explaining the more subtle theoretical difference between aesthetics or infusing aesthetics into engineering. And since you quoted Dewey, I often see he says science as a habit of mind and art as an aesthetic experience. I often see teaching as a combination of both. And that's because we've traditionally programmed ourselves and the way we teach science and engineering as so departmental, so dogmatic, so stuck in its way that aesthetics almost has no shot of existing in that space. But I try teaching it from the premise of aesthetics first. So something like, why do you like the iPhone? And most people's response to why they like the iPhone without them, necessarily questioning it, is that it's actually aesthetically beautiful. Like Steve Jobs was an arts person. He's not an engineer. And I mean, we don't necessarily need to go into the morality of his character or any of those things. I'm just talking about the actual product, right? Like the reason you like to wear or use the things you do is because they aesthetically appeal to you. So starting off in engineering or methods of science teaching class or any of those with a concentration on aesthetics and why design is the foundation of connection to that product or classroom space matters. Like, for example, I always tell my teachers, like, you're designers first. Before you say a word to your students, you're responsible for designing a classroom. For the moment they walk in, they feel different. So you don't have to say a word for your classroom to feel different. And so you're a designer. You have to design a space. And so to me, what you said absolutely matters. Like it's and I don't think I necessarily thought this way until the last few years. It was like, oh, the classroom, it doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter how you teach engineering, and does it work? That's all that matters. And I think that has drastically changed after I've inquired about my own connection to science,
Yeah.
engineering, and design.
So thank you for that. And I know Kurt is waiting for a question and we are tight on time, but there's this wonderful quote by Steve Jobs that I love that, where he talks about this cabinet maker who cares as much about the back of the cabinet, which will never ever be visible to anybody. And yesterday I was thinking of this professor of mine back in design school in India, R.K. Joshi, who's no more. But I remember this moment when he was looking at our work on the walls and he didn't say a word. He pulled off one poster from his wallet, took out a blade. He carries a dang blade with him all the time for some reason. And then got a right thing, T, and then cut out a tiny sliver because it had bothered him that it wasn't 90 degrees. He didn't say a word to us. He didn't have to say anything. I remember that moment to this day, that if you care about design, you care.
Yes.
It's not about giving a lecture to a student. It's like he's just not going to let me sleep at night. The damn thing is not 90 degrees. And to me, that is such a powerful, both a model that RK left with all of us, or at least with me for sure. But again, about like just this idea of that there is a caring that we bring to the work that we do. And I think good educators model that, and I think that students take that, and there is an aesthetic element to that as well. So thank you for letting me share that story. I know Kurt has a question, and Kurt, we have 7 minutes, so go for it.
Sure. So I heard right at the beginning, you talk about, in the blog post anyhow, designing experiences at the intersection of creative problem solving, right? Empowering people through self-inquiry. I've been studying for 2 decades self-directed learning. And today I gave a talk at Thammasat University, yesterday at Chulalongkorn, on how AI can facilitate self-directed learning, right? And I've designed an instrument for that to measure self-directed learning, or at least get a sense of that, guidelines, checklists. So when I read this sentence, that you're designing experiences at the intersection of science, aesthetics, and self-inquiry, I'm wondering whether you have created something for teachers to self-assess the effectiveness of their instruction for fostering self-inquiry, for creating environments for learning in a self-directed or self-inquiry type of fashion, or are you working on such? Have you developed instruments, checklists, whatever you want to call it, guides, scaffolds that people might use, might access, and where would they go to find them? And how long is it taking you, if you have them, how long is it taking you to build them?
I'm guessing this question is for me, Kurt.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
But both of you, but
yeah,
please,
sure,
both
sure.
of you, if you both have answers, please.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a very poignant question, and I've developed a structure. It's taken me, I'd probably say, 4 years, but I would also claim it's been centuries in the making, particularly because self-inquiry and contemplative practices are so internal that it's hard to quantify them or provide some sort of empirical evidence as to their effect. But we live in a world that values and should value results and the process of science. So it does matter. And so for me, it's two-pronged. The first is the educator first must become a practitioner of some sorts. And it's hard to teach self-inquiry and introspection and reflection if the educator is not engaging with it first, right? If the educator is not engaging in expanding their creativity, expanding their understanding of science and the self, then there's no point in teaching it. It's almost like they're a hypocrite, but it's also inauthentic. Like your classroom doesn't replicate their classroom replicates what practice you're doing. So if you're not practicing first, then it's hard to engage in aesthetics, engineering, and the science of self simultaneously. Secondly, this is a more external, and that's a self-assessment for the educator. is there a regular practice of introspection? Is there whatever exercises you're doing, whether it's Socratic dialogue or journaling within a classroom, are you doing that as well with other educators or by yourself? And then there's the external aspect of it. If you are attempting to build a classroom that is founded on these ideas, are you making sure that there's student voice and student centeredness in the design of the classroom, in the approach to teaching? So do students have a say in how a lesson is structured, what the classroom looks like? Is there any sort of practice where you're not always the lecturer and instructor in the classroom? So I'll do an exercise where on a daily basis, or at least twice a week, teachers do almost like how most indigenous traditions or contemplative traditions teach sometimes, is in a circle where you can't really tell who the teacher is. That the circle is almost like Ubuntu, if you've heard of the West African word, but there, the inquiry is collective, and that regular practice must exist. And now to assess whether it's working is qualitative in the artifacts that the students develop in the science or engineering classroom. So in a research we recently did, we had students design sneakers and shoes that they wear every single day. We 3D printed them, and they had we had fabrics and markers for them to design it. Now, our assessment of whether these inquiry exercises were working was, do the artifacts represent that students' experiences, that students' culture, that students' background, that students' interests? And by looking at the colors of the shoe, what they wrote on it, what design they chose, we determined whether these exercises that were done prior to the design were actually effective. So I wouldn't say these measures are completely concrete, but I've attempted to actualize them in my lab, the Innervate Makerspace, where we host workshops with teachers and students from New York City. And we try to do, 2 or 3 day workshops where they first engage in these contemplative practices, then we design, we make, and then we hold the artifacts to determine whether there was an effect of this.
That sounds good. We're running out of time, but does Tara have a 30-second or 45-second?
I'm sorry about that, Talya.
No worries.
Talya, sorry.
I'll just say, in general, with the experiences that we teach, it's all ends with presentation, with show and tells. Everyone shows off the work and gets critiqued. That you need to show what you've made and hear what people think about it. And that's fundamental in every classroom.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm looking at the time. We are out of time. I actually had one more question, but I'm going to pass on that. But I just want to say thank you, Talya. Thank you, Raaghav, for joining us today. Great conversation as always. And the hour just flies by, as I had told you before. Thank you for joining us. And for next Saturday at our usual time, noon Eastern, we will be celebrating with Host Reflect of our 250th episode, which I genuinely can't believe that we've been doing it for 5.5 years now. And this just goes to show how much we just enjoy hanging out with each other and getting wonderful guests and having these beautiful conversations. So thank you again, Raaghav, Talya, and Chris. I will see you next week. And you guys have a wonderful weekend. Appreciate your giving your Saturday to us.